There was an article that was purported to have been written by her in one of the magazine, one of the Star or whatever those terrible things are, in which she made certain assertions and accusations that none of us ever believed a word of it.
There are moments in a man's life when the weight of unexpressed gratitude becomes heavier than silence can bear. For Tom Selleck, that moment has arrived at 80 years old, an age when the noise of Hollywood ambition fades into something quieter, something more honest. An age when a man looks back not at the roles he played or the awards he collected, but at the people who shaped him, the friendships that carried him, and the debts of the heart that no amount of success can ever fully repay. And at the very top of that list, in letters so large they cast a long shadow across everything Tom Selleck has ever done or become, sits one name, James Garner. For decades, Selleck kept his feelings about Garner largely to himself. Not because the feelings weren't there, they were always there, deep and abiding and genuine, but because some things feel too important to risk reducing with casual conversation. Some people occupy a space in your life so significant that the ordinary language of Hollywood interviews and talk show appearances feels entirely insufficient to describe them. James Garner was that person for Tom Selleck. A mentor, a mirror, a standard bearer. And now, at 80, Selleck is ready to tell the truth about what that friendship meant, what it cost him to keep it quiet for so long, and why he believes the world deserves to understand the kind of man James Garner truly was. Thomas William Selleck was born on January 29, 1945, in Detroit, Michigan, the son of a working-class family that understood the value of discipline, hard work, and keeping your word. When the family relocated to Sherman Oaks, California, young Tom found himself immersed in the golden promise of post-war Southern California. The sunshine, the open spaces, and the buzzing optimism of a country that believed anything was possible if you were willing to put in the work. As a teenager, Selleck was consumed by sports. Basketball, in particular, became his great passion, and he pursued it with the same intensity and focus that would later define his acting career. He was good enough to earn a basketball scholarship to the University of Southern California, where he played for the Trojans while studying business administration. The idea of becoming an actor was nowhere on his radar. He was a practical young man with practical ambitions, and Hollywood, despite being right there in his backyard, felt like a world that belonged to other people. But life has a way of rerouting you when something more important is waiting around the corner. A drama coach at USC noticed something in Selleck, a natural ease in front of people, a quality that the camera would later love, and encouraged him to consider acting seriously. Selleck resisted at first, but curiosity gradually overcame skepticism. He took classes. He did a few commercial appearances, including the now legendary Pepsi advertisements that introduced his face to a national audience in the 1960s. And somewhere in the process, something clicked. The young man who had imagined his life playing out in gyms and boardrooms began to understand that his real stage was somewhere else entirely. What followed was the long, unglamorous apprenticeship that every great career requires. Guest appearances on television shows. Small roles that paid modestly and taught enormously. The slow accumulation of craft, confidence, and the particular kind of resilience that Hollywood demands from everyone who wants to last. Selleck was persistent. He was patient. And he was learning how to become not just an actor, but a professional, someone who showed up fully prepared, treated every role with seriousness, and understood that character, both on screen and off, was the foundation everything else rested on. Long before Tom Selleck ever set foot on a professional set, he was already in James Garner's classroom, sitting in his living room, watching television, absorbing everything a young man could absorb from someone who made acting look as natural as breathing. Garner had burst onto the national consciousness in the late 1950s through his role in Maverick, the Western series that made him a star but also revealed something more interesting than mere stardom. Garner's Brett Maverick was not the brooding, granite-jawed hero that audiences had come to expect from Westerns. He was charming and clever, quick with a joke and quicker with an exit strategy. He had warmth without softness, toughness without cruelty, and, most remarkably, a sense of humor that felt completely genuine rather than scripted. He was, in a word, real. And in a medium that was still learning what television could do, that realness was revolutionary. For a young Tom Selleck watching from Southern California, Garner represented something he had not seen described in any drama class. Here was proof that you could command a screen without shouting. That you could be compelling without being theatrical. That masculinity on camera did not have to announce itself with clenched fists and brooding silences. It could just as easily arrive with a grin, a shrug, and an absolutely perfect line reading that made everyone in the room feel they were watching someone think in real time. Selleck filed all of this away. He did not know then that he would one day work alongside this man. He did not know that Garner would become one of the most important relationships of his life. He was just a fan, deeply impressed, and storing impressions that would later prove to be among the most valuable pieces of education he ever received. By 1980, Tom Selleck was not a household name, but he was known in the right circles as someone with genuine talent and a screen presence that was difficult to ignore. He had built a solid foundation through years of guest appearances and supporting roles, and he had developed the kind of quiet professional reputation that casting directors and producers respect. He was ready for something bigger. He just needed the right role to arrive. It arrived in the form of Thomas Magnum, a Navy veteran turned private investigator living in Hawaii, driving a Ferrari, wearing Hawaiian shirts, and sporting one of the most iconic mustaches in television history. When CBS gave the green light to Magnum PI, they handed Selleck not just a job but a cultural moment. The show premiered in 1980 and quickly became one of the most watched programs on American television, launching Selleck into a level of fame that he had worked toward for years but perhaps never fully anticipated. What made Magnum PI work, what made it something beyond a simple action-adventure show, was Selleck himself. He brought to Thomas Magnum exactly the qualities he had admired in James Garner for 2 decades: warmth, humor, a physical confidence that never curdled into arrogance, and a deeply human vulnerability that made audiences care about this man on a level that went beyond entertainment. Magnum was funny when he needed to be funny. He was tough when toughness was required. But he was also capable of doubt, of loss, of the kind of emotional honesty that most television heroes of the era were not permitted to show. Selleck understood that these moments of humanity were not weaknesses in the character. They were the whole point. The show ran for 8 seasons. It earned Selleck an Emmy Award and a Golden Globe. It made him one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. And through it all, running quietly beneath the surface of every performance, was the influence of James Garner, the template Selleck had been studying since childhood, now brought to life through his own distinctive interpretation. By the time Tom Selleck and James Garner worked together professionally, Selleck was already famous. But fame, he would quickly discover, changes very little about the experience of meeting someone you have admired for most of your life. The nervousness is still there. The self-consciousness is still there. The quiet, pressing desire to be seen as worthy of the other person's respect is still very much alive. Selleck has spoken candidly about how anxious he was before their first real encounter. Here was the man he had watched on television as a boy, the actor whose career had quietly served as a compass for his own professional ambitions. What if Garner turned out to be cold, distant, dismissive in the casual, thoughtless way that Hollywood could sometimes produce in people who had been famous long enough to lose interest in everyone outside their immediate circle? These were the fears that accompanied Selleck onto that set. What he found instead was something so different from his fears that it almost startled him. Garner was warm. He was funny in the easy, unperformative way of someone who genuinely finds the world amusing. He was interested in the people around him, genuinely interested, not in the performative way of someone working a room, but in the quiet, attentive way of someone who believes that other people are worth paying attention to. And he treated everyone, from the director to the most junior crew member, with exactly the same level of human respect and courtesy. That last detail hit Selleck harder than he expected. He had been around enough famous people by that point to know how rare genuine egalitarianism was in Hollywood. Fame creates hierarchies with brutal efficiency, and most people, even good, decent people, succumb to those hierarchies eventually. They start treating the world in terms of who matters and who doesn't, who deserves their full attention and who can be managed with a nod and a half-smile. Garner, somehow, had never made that bargain. He treated the boom operator and the executive producer as if they occupied the same moral universe, because, in his view, they did. Jim didn't have a phony bone in his body, Selleck has said in the years since, and the simplicity of that observation contains within it an entire philosophy of how to live and work. It was not, Selleck would emphasize, that Garner was naive about the politics of Hollywood or incapable of protecting his own interests. He was shrewd, experienced, and had fought battles throughout his career that had cost him significantly. But none of that experience had made him cynical about people themselves. He had seen the worst of the industry and somehow emerged from it with his fundamental belief in human decency intact. For Selleck, watching that, understanding that it was possible, was as important as anything he ever learned about the technical aspects of acting. The conversations that unfolded between Selleck and Garner during their time working together were not formal lectures or structured mentoring sessions. They were the ordinary exchanges that happen between two people who genuinely like each other. Conversations over coffee, exchanges during breaks in filming, the quiet back and forth of two professionals who had been around long enough to have opinions about everything and the wisdom to know when to share them. But within those ordinary exchanges, Garner offered Selleck something invaluable: perspective. He had been in Hollywood longer. He had experienced the heights and the lows with a thoroughness that Selleck was only beginning to accumulate. And he had developed, through all of it, a clear and deeply personal philosophy about what mattered and what didn't. Fame, Garner told him, was a weather system. It changed constantly, arrived without warning, and could disappear just as suddenly. Building your sense of self on the foundation of public recognition was like building a house on sand. The only foundation worth anything was character, who you were when no one was watching, how you treated the people closest to you, whether your actions at the end of the day reflected the person you actually wanted to be. The rest, the awards, the fame, the box office numbers, the cover stories, was noise. Meaningful noise, perhaps. Enjoyable noise, certainly. But noise nonetheless. Garner also warned Selleck about ego, which he regarded as the occupational hazard of their profession.